Aloha everyone, I'm Ulrik and it is a pleasure for me to present our work on how to empower students to achieve their device use goals with the Reduce Digital Distraction workshop. Without further ado, please put away your phone and pay attention. Now, smartphones and laptops are great, but many people find themselves overly distracted by notifications, infinitely scrolling feeds, or urges to check the devices. This can seriously harm productivity and well-being, so what can we do about it? Well, one potential solution is digital self-control tools. These are apps, browser extensions, and system settings that modify user interfaces to make it easier to stay in control. For example, browser extensions let people control the layout of the internet and have their own version of YouTube, say, where you can hide recommended videos or other elements when you need to focus. There are many types of these tools, but overall, the research on them demonstrates a powerful potential to help people change their behavior and feel more in control. However, there is a gap between the research and the challenge that people face when they want to use these tools in practice. The focus of most research has been to study whether a single intervention applied on a single device in the same way for a whole group of participants can affect the specific narrow goals of reducing screen time or smartphone addiction. By contrast, the problem an individual faces is this: how can I browse the large landscape of different types of digital self-control tools and then find and apply the right combination of them across my personal devices to achieve my personal goals? And my goals are usually different from simply reducing screen time. Very little research has focused on this much more messy but highly important practical challenge. To address it, we teamed up with the counselling service at the University of Oxford in the UK, who works with around 3,000 students a year. They had an urgent need to help a growing number of students who were looking for advice on how to stay in control of their device use. With the counselling service, we created a workshop intervention that we called the Reduce Digital Distraction Workshop, or the RED workshop for short. In this workshop, we explored 3 specific research questions. First, how do students actually want to change their device use within their ecosystem as a whole, not just a smartphone? Second, how much do different types of digital self-control tools vary in how useful students find them? And finally, can this kind of workshop intervention, where we combined reflection on personal goals with self-selection of relevant digital self-control tools, can that actually improve people's ability to control their digital life? So what did we do? We started with an iterative design process in May 2019 with some in-person workshops where students discussed the challenges in small groups and were introduced to digital self-control tools. After COVID hit, we translated our learnings from these pilots into an online format and did some further piloting. And then from March 2021, we started collecting data from the workshop version I'll present to you now. So what is the workshop? The workshop lasted 1 hour and 10 minutes. We delivered it online on Zoom, typically with 4 to 7 participants, and used the whiteboard tool Miro for interactive workshop tasks. In the workshop, there were 3 main steps. First, participants wrote down some reflections on the challenges and goals. Then they explored a curation of digital self-control tools, and then they committed to try out specific options. I will unpack these methods now by stepping through the workshop through the eyes of a participant that I will call Thomas. This is not his real name, this is just a stock photo, this is not actually him. But Thomas was a young master student who signed up for RED workshop in May 2021. A couple of days before the workshop, he filled in an opening survey, which included his motivation for signing up and how he was currently using his devices. Importantly, he also filled in the brief digital self-control scale, which was our adaptation of the brief self-control scale, one of the most widely used scales for measuring general self-control ability in psychology. So items included: in the past week, my digital devices distracted me from my long-term goals, and so on. We designed the scale to indicate a general ability to ignore unwanted digital distractions and urges across all of a person's digital devices, because we expected this to be relevant to most of the more specific goals that people would have. You can find our development and validation of the scale on the Open Science Framework. On the day of the workshop, Thomas tuned in to the workshop on a Zoom call with 4 of the participants, and the steps that he and the others went through was ones that we had designed inspired by basic research in personal informatics and behavior change. Specifically, the reflection step funneled participants towards realistic, actionable goals for change. Then the exploration phase provided them with specific actions they could take with digital self-control tools to achieve those goals. And then the commit phase nudged them to make specific plans for implementing those tools and providing some accountability to actually do it. Specifically in the reflection step, Thomas and the others asked themselves 4 questions. What concerns you about the use of the internet and so on? What external triggers in your digital environment and internal triggers in yourself drives your concerns? What have you tried already? And what do you think success would look like for you? In Thomas's case, what he wanted really was to not use distracting or easy reward apps during the workday and in general feel much more in control. In the second step, we introduced 4 types of digital self-control tools based on classifications in previous research. Specifically, we introduced tools for blocking or removing distractions, tools for tracking yourself and visualizing use, or maybe just working with a focus timer, tools for reminding you of what you wanted to do when you chose your device, and tools for making it more attractive to do that thing you wanted. For example, the app Forest. In that app, a virtual tree will wither and die if you use your phone when you intend not to actually use it. Participants were exploring these tools in the form of a card sorting task where they would sort 13 different strategy cards into different categories. And finally, they could look up the details for the ones they were most interested in on a website we built where they could find specific tools for Android or iPhone and so on and so forth. The workshop ended with the participants committing themselves to trying out a few specific tools which they wrote down on the mirror board and in an exit survey. 1 week later, we reminded them of what they had said in the exit survey that they wanted to do, and then we followed up with them in the subsequent academic term about whether it was actually useful. In Thomas' case, I'll just illustrate 2 of the 5 strategies he tried. He was still using grayscale, and he was still using this thing where he would replace his newsfeed on Facebook and recommendations on YouTube with a to-do list. Grayscale, he was a bit but he found it very, very useful to replace recommendations on YouTube and the Facebook newsfeed. He said it fundamentally changed his relationship with YouTube, and he was now stopped from doom scrolling on Facebook because he didn't have a newsfeed. And he said he felt much more in control of how he used his devices in a way that made him very proud. And in fact, Thomas more than doubled his score on the digital self-control scale. The data collection finished with, my face is in the way, finished with us interviewing a subset of participants to get some more in-depth data on how they had actually applied strategies after the workshop. We analyzed our data in the following way. We applied reflexive thematic analysis to the qualitative data. We analyzed it by being 5 authors together. I analyzed, coded everything, and had help from 4 other co-authors. We independently coded the data first before we iteratively discussed emerging codes and themes. And then we used R to analyze the quantitative data, and you can find all the details in the paper and on the Open Science Framework. So what did we learn? Well, we did these workshops with about 280 students at the University of Oxford, spread across 62 workshops. We had a slight overweight of PhD students, and most of our participants were aged between 18 and 29 years of age. About half of our students came to the workshop because they were concerned about their productivity, and about the other half were concerned about both their productivity and their mental health. For most of our participants, it was very important to do something about the way in which they were currently using the devices. So what did they want to change? Well, first of all, for most participants, it was not just about their smartphone. Typically, it was about both the smartphone and the way in which they were using their laptop or desktop computer. Only about a bit more than 1/3 of our students said that it was just about the smartphone. What did they want to achieve? Well, there were 2 sort of higher level goals that they wanted to achieve. The first was to use the devices more intentionally and just feel a bit more in control, just like we saw in the case of Thomas. And the second was to just be able to achieve a better balance in the way in which they spend their time. For example, participant 123 said, I would spend more time in a day reading books than I do on social media. They reported 3 more specific goals that we interpreted as ways to achieve the 2 more general goals. Specifically, to have clear boundaries around when and where they would use their devices. For example, I focus on work in the mornings and don't check email or social media before noon. Many also wanted to limit their use the amount they use the devices, or the frequency with which they use them. And finally, many also wanted to have a healthier digital environment where they could, for example, bypass the way that apps are designed to make me addicted and keep on going even though it won't be good for me. Now, how much did the different types of digital self-control tools vary in how useful students found them? Well, our students typically tried 3 different kinds of strategies across multiple devices, and then the follow-up were typically still using 2 of them. Thomas was still using 3. Now, how much did the strategies vary? Well, the answer is that they varied a great deal in their average usefulness. This is a little bit of a busy plot. You can see it on to the left here, the number of participants who tried each strategy, and then the coloring thing here you see at the usefulness ratings that people gave them. So if something is dark green, it means that it was very useful. You can clearly see that the strategies received very different ratings. I just want to highlight here that strategies that reduce exposure to distractions, as well as focus timers, seem to be generally useful, found useful by more than 75% of people who tried them. For example, P107, just like Thomas, also said that it was very, very useful to be able to remove recommended videos from YouTube. And when people used focus timers, they typically said that it made it much easier for them to get started with the work in the first place. And other strategies just had much more individual variation. For example, grayscale was the second most commonly applied strategy, but it had an almost uniform distribution of usefulness ratings. So some people really liked it, but then others were just like, P6 here, my phone just looks sad as if, well, it was dying. Finally, did the workshop actually seem to work overall? Did it improve people's ability to exercise digital self-control? Well, based on the scores in the brief digital self-control scale, the answer seemed to be a clear yes. We observed a large and very, very significant increase in scores. Keep in mind here that it was actually just over half who responded to the follow-up survey. So if we assume that those who did not respond didn't improve at all, then there was actually still a medium-sized increase in digital self-control. Our participants also said that they felt they spent less time on their laptop, the smartphone, and the tablet. Keep in mind that our study here was an open trial without any control group, so the quantitative data should be carefully triangulated with other parts of the data to make sense of it. In the qualitative data, there were some clear themes that emerged. The first was that people said that they felt much more empowered and in control because they had learned about the spectrum of things that they could do to take active charge of their digital life. And this extended to people finding things that were not even included in the workshop website. For example, participant 11 deleted her Instagram app and then independently searched for an extension to modify Instagram in the browser that we did not include in the website, but she had learned this kind of thing was possible, and that enabled her to go and help herself afterwards. People typically also said they were more aware and mindful of their use, and that they managed to achieve a better balance between the device use and other activities. Some also felt that the effect faded a bit over time and wanted it to be something like booster workshops that could keep their motivation up after the workshop. We had some limitations in this study. First of all, our students were self-selected at a university with a very heavy academic workload and don't necessarily represent students at large. We also, again, had no control group, so further research should establish the effectiveness of this kind of workshop in a more controlled manner. We also deliberately focused on subjective outcome measures only because there's no objective standards really for what good use looks like. But we do, of course, think that future work should include some objective measures of device use to see how that correlates to what people think they changed. And finally, of course, there are multiple ways to select digital self-control tools to include in this kind of workshop, and different kinds of things to include would likely lead to different kinds of findings. Overall, we do think the results from this study are really encouraging. We believe this shows that we can effectively improve digital self-control and empower end users while generating research data at scale by supporting reflection and self-experimentation in this kind of way. So we can find a large open data sets on the open science framework from based on the reflection phase. And then second, we also just want to highlight here that we think this data shows that the different kinds of strategies differ greatly in average usefulness. So interventions that reduce exposure to distractions as well as focus timers seem generally useful. Other approaches have much more individual variation. Thank you so much for your attention and stay focused in your digital life.